Welcome to Magnificat TV news program, dedicated to providing news of the Church. Today is Wednesday, November 29, 2023, and these are our news. The Secretary of State, Cardinal Parolin, has written to the German bishops, forbidding them to approve homosexuality and female priesthood. In a letter to the German women theologians, the Pope has shown his concern for the situation of the Catholic Church in Germany as a consequence of its synod. The president of the Polish Episcopate has criticized the way in which the Synod of Synodality has been conducted and warned of the risks to the faith. The Pope has appointed a coadjutor bishop for Monsignor Ray of the Diocese of Toulon in France, removing his responsibility for the seminary and communities. On Saturday, the Pope's audience were cancelled due to a cold with fever. On Sunday, he prayed the Angelus from the chapel of Santa Marta and not from the Apostolic Palace. Cardinal Parolin, Vatican Secretary of State, has forbidden German bishops to approve female priesthood and homosexual acts.
Secretary of the State, Cardinal Parolin, has told the German bishops in an official note that priestly ordination is exclusively for men and that the Church's teaching on homosexual relations are non-negotiable matters and should therefore be left out of the German synodal debate. Cardinal Parolin acknowledges that there are issues that can be debated, but he points out too that do not admit of discussion. Priestly ordination reserved only for men, and what the Church teaches on the practice of homosexual relations. Regarding the first question, the Cardinal cites St. John Paul II's apostolic letter, Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, in which the Polish Pope decreed that the Church has in no way the faculty to confer priestly ordination on women, and that this ruling must be considered definitive by all the faithful. Regarding the Church's teaching on homosexual acts, Cardinal Parolin writes the following to the German bishops. Another subject on which a local church has no opportunity to express a different opinion concerns homosexual acts. For even if it is recognized that, from a subjective point of view, there may be various factors that ask us not to judge people, this does not in any way change the assessment of the objective morality of these actions. The constant teaching of the Church emphasizes that the objective moral evaluation of sexual relations between the person of the same sex is established with accuracy and certainty. Another issue that is not in dispute here is the decree or subjective moral credibility of such relationships in each individual case.
In a letter to 4 German women theologians, the Pope has shown his concern about what is happening in Germany as a result of the Synod.
Pope Francis has once again criticized the reforms of the Catholic Church in Germany. In a personal letter to 4 German laywomen, including 2 female theologian professors, the Pontiff wrote that he shares the concern about the many concrete steps that have been taken in this local church, which threaten to move further and further away from the common path of the universal church. In February of this year, the 4 German women theologians announced their intention to leave the synod of the church in their country because it means distancing themselves from the rest of the church. They said then, participating in a process in which repeated interventions and clarifications by the Vatican authorities and the Pope himself have been ignored would mean supporting a cause that is objectively leading the church in Germany into isolation from the universal church. We cannot and will not share responsibility to this. The German women theologians said, as they left the synod. Later, theologian Katrina Western Hosman, professor at the Franciscan University of Steubenville, explained her decision by stating that the synod's decision on sexual morality has been made beforehand. Already in September 2019, theologian Marinine Cholesa withdrew from the synod by refusing to discuss the priesthood of women, since that is a question settled by the magisterium of the Church. In the letter written in German and handwritten and signed, Franciscus, the Pope, refers to one of the fruits of the German Synod. It is about the Synodal Committee, which has since been constituted, is to prepare for the establishment of a Synodal Council. In this body, the laity will be in the majority and will have the right to vote. Such an approach could alienate Germans from the unity of the Church. The letter states, a consultative and decision-making body, such as the one being prepared, cannot be reconciled with the sacramental structure of the Catholic Church. The Holy See already indicated this in the German bishops in January of this year, but the prelates have not paid the slightest attention to it. Francis' letter of November 10 is a response to a letter dated November 6. In addition to Western Hotman, theologian Marianne Cholesa, journalist Dorothea Schmidt, and religious philosopher Hannah Barbara Gell Frankwitt expressed their concern about unity with Rome in view of the German reformist cause.
Uneasiness with the Pope on the part of the Italian Jewish community, they accuse him of maintaining equidistance with the Palestinians, who are holding Jewish civilians hostage.
Italian rabbis have criticized the Pope for his words at last Wednesday's audience on the war in Gaza, in which he accused both Hamas and the State of Israel of terrorism. Pope Francis said these words at the end of his speech at the general audience. And let us not forget to persevere in prayer for those who suffer from wars in many parts of the world, especially for the dear people of Ukraine, Israel and Palestine. This morning I received 2 delegations, one from Israelis who have relatives as hostages in Gaza, and one from Palestinians who have relatives suffering in Gaza. They suffer a lot, and I heard how they both suffer. Wars do this, the Pope continued. But here we have gone beyond wars. This is not war making, this is terrorism. Please, let us go forward for peace. Let us pray for peace. Let us pray much for peace. The Council of the Assembly of the Rabbis of Italy has issued a note stating, the Pope publicly accused both parties of terrorism. These positions at the highest level follow problematic statements by distinguished representatives of the Church in which there is no trace of condemnation of the Hamas aggression, or, in the name of a supposed impartiality, they put the aggressor and the attacked on same plane. We ask ourselves, the rabbis added, what good have decades of Jewish-Christian dialogue been, speaking of friendship and fraternity, if in reality, when there are others who try to exterminate the Jews instead of receiving expression of closeness and understanding, the response is one of diplomatic acrobatics, balances, and easy equidistance, which are certainly distance, but not equity.
Monsignor Ray, Bishop of Toulouse, will have a coadjutor who will be in charge of the seminary and communities of that diocese after 2 years without being able to ordain priests.
The Pope has intervened in the French diocese of Toulon. Unlike the case of the diocese of Tyler, the pontiff did not depose the bishop, Monsignor Ray, but appointed Monsignor Touvert, coadjutor bishop with special powers of the assistant government and immediate right of succession in the case of resignation of death of the titular bishop. After the prohibition to ordain priests and the apostolic visitation ordered by Rome to the diocese, whose seminary has a much larger number of seminarians that would correspond to its size, and which has been a place of welcome for a multitude of new ecclesial movements, it was assumed that the Holy See would take some action on Bishop Ray. In a video, the still Bishop of Toulon explained that the new bishop will be in charge of the administration, the formation of seminarians and priests, and the accompaniment of communities. It should be recalled that in October 2013, Bishop Ray created a formation house for future priests from the American continent, which would help to overcome the shortage of native vocations in France. Bishop Ray welcomes Bishop Toubot and thanks God that the bishop is emerging from the storm in which it has been mired since June 2022. This year, a half, he says, has been equally painful for everyone: priests, religious, faithful, and especially the seminarians and their educators. The bishop says that, despite the temptation of anger and incomprehension at the collective sanction, by the grace of God and prayers, they have not given in to discouragement. The bishop thanks the faithful for having accompanied him in this ordeal and affirmed that he is sure that the diocesan church will emerge stronger from what happened.
The cold weather has caused the Pope to come down with the cold, that led to cancellation of Saturday's audience and to his now going out on Sunday to pray the Angelus in St. Peter's Square.
The Pope has been suffering from a cold with some fever. Because of this, Saturday's audiences were cancelled. On Sunday, instead of going out of the window of the Apostolic Palace, overlooking St. Peter's Square as usual, to pray the Angelus with the faithful, he prayed it from the chapel of the house of Santa Marta, where he lives, and it was transmitted to those in the square. After the news of the cancellation of Saturday's audiences broke, the Vatican released a medical report stating that the pontiff had a slight flu. To make sure there were no further complications, he was taken to Gamelli Hospital, where he underwent a CAT scan and lung problems were ruled out.
Our editorial this week is dedicated to commenting on what happened in Argentina's election and the Vatican tensions with the Jews.
The elections held in Argentina, being the homeland of the Pope, have had a great significance, not only for that country and for the rest of the continent, but also for the Catholic Church herself. The opposition candidate, who is the one who won, Milei, a Catholic increasingly closer to Judaism, the opposition candidate, no one expected him to win so overwhelmingly, had made some very aggressive, very strong, very harsh statements before the elections against the Pope and against the Catholic Church in his country, and therefore, besides knowing who was going to win the elections, it was also at stake to know if such a frontal attack to the Church would have political repercussions, not only in a country, I insist, in a country like Argentina, being the Pope an Argentinian. The fact that a candidate attacks, as Milei did, the Church and the Pope, and that he wins the elections overwhelmingly, has evidently a meaning. And it is the little influence that the Catholic Church has in the political life of that country. I think this is unquestionable. An important part of the Catholic hierarchy has sided with the candidate who lost. The Peronist candidate, and had done so, and it must also be said, to defend the pontiff, so harshly treated by Milei. He had done it, it is true, because they identified much more with Peronism than with the opposition candidate. There have been even been Eucharistic celebrations that were more like political rallies led by so-called Villero priests. I repeat, the defeat of the ruling party of Pyrrhonism also implies in some way a defeat for the Catholic Church, or for a significant part of the Catholic Church and the Catholic hierarchy, because where all the Church and many practicing Catholic voters did not want to vote for that party, Pyrrhonism, which had been governing for a long time. What is the lesson? The lesson, I think, is that the Church, the hierarchy of the Church, above all, has to be there to evangelize, that it has to avoid, except in very serious, exceptional cases, entering the political arena, entering the world of parties, and that role is reserved, I do not say exclusively, because there are always exceptions, and there are very serious cases, but it is reserved for the laity. It is the Catholic laity who have to enter the political world. By the way, the vice president-elect who forms the team with Milei is a practicing Catholic and also very close to traditionalism. The Spanish Catholic writer Jimenez Lozano wrote many years ago that when the Church joins politics and gets involved in politics, it is always the Church that is harmed, not politics. First lesson from Argentina, which is valid for Argentina and should be valid for everyone. Thank goodness that fortunately, the Pope called the winner of the elections, Milei. They had a cordial and courteous conversation, and Milei invited the Pope to go to Argentina in a trip that we do not know if it will happen because it was not decided before the elections, but at least this has allowed to save some face. I insist, Milei's accusations against the Pope were excessive, aggressive, and unjustified. It was necessary to defend the Pope. It was necessary to defend the Pope, but not to get into the political arena. A lesson that everyone in Argentina and the rest we all have to learn. There has also been another issue, similar, although really very different. I'm referring to the mediation attempt of Pope Francis in the war between Israelis and Palestinians after the most cruel terrorist attack, unjustifiable, made by the terrorist group Hamas against the kibbutz on the border with Gaza in Israel. The Pope has tried to mediate with magnificent intentions in search of peace. The situation has become very complicated, and today we have a Jewish community with explicit manifestations, for example, in Italy, very upset with the Pope. It is not the first time that there is a situation, never the same but similar. We have to remember the 2 world wars in which there were Catholics on both sides, and the Pope on duty was in a delicate situation. Why? Because he had Catholics in Germany, and he had Catholic in France, and in all the countries involved in the war. We must also remember how bad Pius XII had it, and the consequences that the decisions he made still have had his memory. Pius XII was responsible for the salvations of thousands of Jews. He welcomed thousands of Jews. He gave the order for them to be welcomed in churches and convents, not only in Rome and not only in the Vatican, but in other parts of Italy and the world, for example, in Assisi. But when he knew what was happening in the concentration camps, he did not give publicity to it, possibly for the fear of reprisals against Catholics and against the Jews who were refugees in convents and parishes, and that is there. He still had not been forgiven. Well, these are difficult decisions in very complicated moments. Precisely for this reason, it would be advisable for professionals to make the decisions, to intervene, to act, because it is not the same if the people are angry or discredit the Secretary of State, for example, Cardinal Parolin, than if it's a pontiff, and he's hurt, discredited, attacked by one and not by the other. It would be just as serious if the angry ones were Palestinians. I do not mean by that it's more serious if the Jews were angry. No, it would be just as serious if either of the two parties were angry. Besides, this has also happened with the mediation attempt between Ukraine and Russia. I'm not the one. Really, I am not the one to give lessons to the Pope. These are very delicate situations, but I believe that the Pope has to dedicate himself above all to exhort for peace, to ask for prayers for peace, to ask for reconciliation, also to ask for justice, to ask for peace, and let the diplomats be the ones to enter into such delicate and complex situations, because they do not only have more experience, but also because if they get discredited, in the end it is less serious, even if they have had a bad time, than if the one whose prestige is damaged is the pontiff's. Then, this week, we have had the usual, that is to say, the German Synod, which is a flame that does not go out. The German Synod that has met to go ahead with its project, with the so-called Synod Council. Well, but this week we have learned that the Pope has answered a letter addressed to him by 4 German Catholic academics, where the academics expressed their concern for what could happen in Germany as a consequence of the Synod. Well, the Pope has answered the letter and has said that he's also very concerned about what is happening, and that he also regretted that the message he wrote to all German Catholics, and especially to the Bishops' Conference, when the Synod was beginning its journey, had not been heeded. I understand that it is not the same to act against a particular bishop, like Strickland in the United States, Ray in France. Above all, they are conservatives that you know they are going to obey, than against an almost entire Episcopal Conference with very few exceptions. The German Episcopal Conference is, with few exceptions, is supporting and developing the German Synod. It is not the same, because we're talking about an Episcopal Conference that is somehow the representative of the Catholics in the whole country, although there is a great internal dissent in Germany. Well, it is not the same to act in one way or another, but I think it is good to remember the words of Cardinal Mueller when the German Synod began, where the Cardinal asked the Pope to act, and to act as soon as possible. Cardinal Mueller, who is German and who knows what is happening in his country, recalled what has happened when Luther began. He said that lukewarmness or hesitation of the Pope at the time to act against Luther allowed Luther to gain time and strengthen himself, gain allies, gain friends, and then it was much more difficult to act against him, and the very serious schism occurred, and we're still suffering the consequences today. Cardinal Mueller said that we have to act, and we have to do it as soon as possible to avoid greater damage, or even to avoid the possibility of breaking the Catholic Church in Germany. I do not want to finish without remembering that on Sunday we celebrate the Solemnity of Christ the King. When this day arrives, I always remember the Spanish martyrs. We should also remember the Cristero martyrs of Mexico, but I remember in a special way the Spanish martyrs, those, today we can already say, more than 10,000 priests, religious, and also laymen who died out of hatred for the faith, at the hands of socialists, communists, anarchists, who are with other names perhaps the same ones who govern Spain at this moment, and who never asked forgiveness on behalf of those who preceded them with the same or similar acronyms of their parties, and who never asked for forgiveness for what they did. They were cruel massacres preceded by dreadful tortures. Why? Because those martyrs did not want to worship the God of hatred, the communist God who is the God of hatred. He puts the cloak of justice, but he is the God of hatred. They did not want to worship him, because they had already consecrated their lives to the God of love. And they died shouting, "Love, live, Christ the King," and also died as Christ did, forgiving their enemies. Let us remember on this solemnity of Christ the King that He alone is our God and Lord, and that we have no politicians and we have no leader who can replace in our hearts the sovereignty of God, who can replace Christ the King. Until next week, God willing.
We will continue to keep you informed of what is happening in the church, but during the meantime, you can visit our website www.magnificat.tv. See you next week, God willing.